Good, thank you. Sorry, just
Arranging?
yeah,
Okay.
making sure everything works. Hello, everyone. We'll get started in about 5 minutes, so get your drinks, finish your food, go to the toilet if you need to, and take a seat afterwards. Cool. We're about to get started, so if people can make their way to the seats. There's a lot of seats here available at the front. You don't all have to sit on the benches at the back. Except these two awesome people here, they show how it goes outward. Oh, you're just acting like you're the star of the show or something. Awesome. Thank you all for coming. It's great to see you here. Or if you're on the live stream, great to have you there. Unfortunately, we are missing a couple of our organizers tonight, including Rob, who always ensures that all the fancy music and transitions and stuff like that for the videos. We're missing out on those. So no happy dance at the start. But let's get this show started. We've got a lot of good stuff. But first, in the spirit of reconciliation, the Melbourne AWS user group acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. Our in-person meetup is being held on the lands of the Wurundjeri people, and I wish to acknowledge them as the traditional owners of this land. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. The other important thing, of course, is, as always, to mention our code of conduct. You can read a short version here or go down at the link to look at all the various details. The super short version of it is be nice to each other. We also have our website. Well, this is where you can find us online. We have a website, melbourne.awsug.org.au. You can find us on LinkedIn, on Mastodon, obviously on YouTube, where you might be following the live stream. And if Twitter still existed, you would have been able to find us there, but apparently it's now X, so X Twitter. I'm not going to X things, sorry. So our Twitter account is going away. Well, no, sorry. Twitter left us. For tonight, we had an unfortunate slight change in schedule. One of our speakers couldn't make it due to personal circumstances. So instead, we have Matt stepping up to give a talk about how we automated our monthly What's New segments. Coincidentally, that What's New segment, he and Jason will be talking about right before that talk. And after Matt's talk, we'll have Michael, who will walk us through a Python serverless URL shortener for all your domains, not just some of them. And as always, we'll end up our evening with the marketplace, which is basically who's hiring. The idea there is you hold up your hands if you're hiring, not if you're looking for a job. because sometimes it can be quite awkward if your boss is sitting right next to you. So yeah, you understand where I'm going with it. Ask questions. Tonight, usually if you're here in the crowd, we'd ask you to wait for a microphone. Tonight instead, we'll ask our presenters to repeat the questions so that the audience can hear it in the live stream or recording. And if you're live streaming, or if you're watching the live stream, you can also ask in our Slack or in the YouTube chat. And then, of course, I want to thank our sponsors. Our gold sponsors, CMD Solutions, as well as our silver sponsors, Versant and CIFO. And of course, I can't forget about our venue sponsor, NAB, without whom we wouldn't have this awesome space where we're all seated. And yes, to clarify, sponsors pay for all the food, drinks, all the things that we end up paying for. So, yay, sponsors. Woo. I mentioned the Slack. It's easy to join. It's just, if you're not on there yet, go join. We've got, pretty sure we passed 1,000 people in there now, which means it's really big. And there's usually something going on. We've got dedicated channels for different things. And yeah, so fun. As always, get involved with the meetup if you're interested. The number one thing we always look for is speakers. If you think you have a talk you want to give, the first thing is your talk is probably going to be interesting. That seems to be the most common thing stopping people from giving a talk is, I don't think people will actually be interested in my talk. Yes, they will be. Everybody runs into the same problems. Everybody has the same ideas, or not ideas, but everybody has the same things to deal with. So whether you are super advanced or just starting out, there's always something we can learn from each other. We also happily help people with their talks. So reach out if you have an idea and we'll help you improve it to a state that you are happy to give it. We're not looking for sponsors currently. I mentioned our sponsors earlier, they're great. And if you want to help out in some way that is not speaking, talk to us. We don't usually have a lot to do at the moment, but depending on your skills, if you're good at graphics design especially, we'd love to have some updated graphical stuff. But yeah. Upcoming events though. So next Wednesday is AWS Cloud Day in Melbourne. Is anybody going there? Awesome. If you want to go but haven't signed up yet, registration is closed, but it says they do accept walk-ins on the day. So be there early and they'll let you in. A little bit further away from home, reInvent is coming. Anybody going there? Yeah, you. you get it all paid for. Cool. If you ever get the chance to go to reInvent, it's great fun to go. So I highly recommend it. I can't go myself this year, but yeah, always good. A non-AWS specific event coming up is the Data Eng Bytes. I really should ask Peter how to properly pronounce it. This is a data-focused conference. It will be held here in Melbourne, also in other cities, but this is the important one because it's in Melbourne. Could be good. Tickets aren't very expensive, so from what I've seen of the speakers, sounds like it could be a good event. And aside from that, we've got the AWS Programming and Tools meetup coming up on Wednesday, the 9th of August, where Stephen Sennett, who's spoken here before, will be talking about, will be running a workshop about VPC ladders. If you're not familiar with VPC ladders, it's really cool, slightly complicated. So this would be a perfect place to learn more about it. Stephen couldn't be here tonight because I think he's in the Philippines right now at the community day there. And with that, I will hand it over to Matt and Jason to tell us about what's new in AWS.
Nothing. Nothing happened in the last month. Don't fall.
All right, so we start this one off with the, well, used to be with what's new in Sydney. Now, thankfully, we've got the what's new in Melbourne and quite a bit on the backup side. So Aurora Serverless v2, BYO IPs for your VPCs, VPC IP address manager, and then, yeah, the backups, cross-account support, support for Amazon S3, network firewall, and the AWS transfer family now in Melbourne.
Yay! Sydney's the boring one, but you know we kind of care about them now. Yeah, M7G, R7G instances. I thought they'd already come to Sydney, but it turns out it's more about the fact that I've completely lost track of instance naming conventions at this point. It's yeah, there are way too many different types now. But yes, the R7 M7Gs come to Sydney, or also AWS supply chain. One of those you're probably not interested in it unless you actually need it, and if you do need it, you're probably very excited. I am not.
Right, databases. There's a lot on here, but mostly they're just sort of updates and the likes. So
the big one here that a lot of people have been jumping for joy over, self-managed Active Directory support for Microsoft SQL Server.
Yep.
Yay! If you're one of those people unfortunate enough to have to run Microsoft SQL Server on RDS, you can now use your self-managed AD, which is
yeah, big for those that need
I
it.
apologize the fact that you have to use Microsoft SQL. I apologize again that you have to use AD.
So, yeah, data, few things there. Probably the Kinesis video stream edge agent. So, yeah, if you're doing, cameras and stuff at the edge, and you can throw an agent on there, pull that straight into your Kinesis.
The mini VPCs for batch is an interesting one. There's potential there that could make smaller batch jobs, the ones where it's kind of like, is it worth my effort? Is it worth the time? Viable. I haven't sat down and really done the numbers on, performance versus cost and all of that yet as to whether or not it's actually a useful candidate. But yeah, it's there. It's an option.
Containers. There's a couple of things for Windows containers on EKS.
There's a lot of sorry this month.
Yeah, and I know some people that have to run Windows containers on EKS, and the Carpenter one was a big thing for them. They were like, oh my God, yes. Poor bastards.
Density limits, density limit increases, always a good thing. I know that pod density has been a little bit of an issue in AWS EKS land, so it's good to see that that's being fixed. But again, it's Windows containers, so just move to Linux.
Machine learning. The Llama 2 from Meta, that was big news for a bit. So yeah, doing stuff with your large language models.
Yay.
Yep, that's
Retrieval API for Kendra. Again, large language models. You've seen it, you've heard it. You'll hear it from me again in a little while. LLMs are where it's at the moment. Kendra now gives you an extra ability to be able to, ingest data to be able to train your LLMs.
Networking, some always good to have sort of extra security if you really need that on your, RSA certs out there. Hey, that's good.
I put the bottom one in the Route 53 resolver for Outpost because I forgot that Outpost was a thing. I'm like, oh, that's right. You can run this stuff on-prem. That's right.
So, yeah. Serverless.
Lambda. Again, when I was reviewing this pack, when I was reviewing the output this month, it's kind of like, yeah, okay, cool, right. So there's been a lot of Lambda stuff. Like there's a lot more to serverless than just Lambda, but like all of the updates that were of any meaningful was sort of like Lambda this, Lambda that, Lambda this, Lambda that.
Recursive loops.
Yeah, the recursive loop stuff got a lot of love on LinkedIn from people. That was obviously a lot more of a problem. Has anybody had a recursive loop problem with Lambda? 2 people. Cool. That's all right. Yeah. It's just linked, like watching my LinkedIn feed, and like every third person was like, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And I'm like, how many people actually have this problem on a regular basis? That yeah. It's the actual thing. Like you do it once and then you go, yeah, I shouldn't have done that. Now I remember why best practice exists. Yeah, talk to me later about my $8,000 elemental bill.
Yep.
Just because you can do 4K doesn't mean you should.
Yeah, so bit on the ONTAP, FSX NetApp ONTAP stuff. So yeah,
talking about things you shouldn't do.
I saw
the middle one.
Mount points, S3 creating new files. Yeah. Do you really want to be creating block storage or object storage files from your block
storage endpoint?
Yeah.
Who doesn't know what mount point is for S3? Cool. All right, fair few people. It was a service that was announced a few months ago that effectively allows you to mount your S3 bucket as a block storage hard drive on your virtual machine. Now, on the immediate face of that, that's like awesome. Massive amounts of storage at only 2.5 cents a gig. Why would I need, EBS volumes? The fact of the matter is you're trying to make an object-based storage system do something it was never designed to do. It's meant as a get-out-of-jail-free card, not an architectural pattern that you should implement in prod. So the fact that they've now made it even easier for you to apply what could be one of the most dangerous anti-patterns out there at the moment is...
Yeah.
Tread carefully, I think, is the motto there.
Yeah, because when it was initially released, it was just read-only. And you sort of said, all right, maybe if you needed to pull some data from S3, that might be an easier way to do it. But yeah, object storage is object storage for a reason. Block storage is block storage for a reason. Choose the best for your need. Don't try and mangle things.
There's probably a talk there somewhere around picking the right storage for your solution at some point in time. It's about making that interesting because storage, it's one of those critically important yet incredibly boring topics.
Security.
Yeah, a little bit. Security hub automation rules, cool. Code Guru security, that's exciting.
Yeah.
Really looking to push that one. Code Guru, just in general, is one of those hot services at the moment that just needs a lot of investigation because they're doing a lot of interesting things with it.
Yeah, Control Tower integration with Security Hub.
It's still Control Tower.
Yeah.
I am way too cynical for this user group, I've decided. I've got to get a lot more upbeat because you can tell I've been doing this too long and I'm just beaten down and I'm that old cranky guy in the corner now.
Yeah, but the Security Hub automation was quite interesting.
And then there's also all the obligatory ones that I make sure aren't in the pack anymore. Config got more rules, Security Hub got more rules, CloudTrail got more rules. Like everything just got its standard monthly, I do more stuff now updates. But they happen every month now, so they don't appear in this deck. So if you haven't looked at those things because it was missing something, chances are it's probably there now, or it will be soon.
DevOps. Well, there's your DevOps
Guru. Woo! Mono repos for Amplify. Because, yay.
Yeah, it's nice stuff.
I'm probably one of the 14 people on Earth that still use Amplify.
Other cool stuff. What's we got in here? Count 3. We've got some Connect stuff in here.
Yes, the obligatory Connect stuff.
I know at least one person in the audience is happy with extra Connect stuff.
Woo.
It's always good to see Connect with more CloudFormation.
The unloved service that it was.
Yeah, for those that haven't seen Connect, it's their AWS's sort of call center.
Contact center
in a box. Used to be very much GUI driven. So it's good to see that there's more CloudFormation out there. So
in fact, it has only been sort of in the last 6-9 months that they've even had API support to be able to deploy a lot of this stuff. Before then, it was literally all, if you want to automate the deployment of this, you are automating the UI interaction through the console and doing it that way, which was never a good idea. So it's been good that they've added the API support, which of course then means that CloudFormation can do its thing because it's now got an endpoint to talk to. There are a lot of limitations to be aware of when you're using CloudFormation with Connect. Obvious reasons, if you're enabling people to spin up systems with the ability to make mass outbound phone calls and mass outbound messages at scale, you kind of want to put some limitations in place. So you're limited to how many Connect instances you can spin up and you can tear down in a month. There's a few gotchas around there. So particularly when you're thinking about any kind of CI/CD pipeline, or just be careful because you're probably going to run into that, because I think the limit's like 5 by default. So you run your pipeline once or twice, get bugs out of it, and all of a sudden it's going to be broken for the rest of the month. But it is nice that it is there. It is nice that it works. It just means I've got to go back and update all of my workshops to use CloudFormation now as opposed to point and click. So upside, can use the code. Downside, I've got like 400 screenshots that are now completely useless.
So yeah.
That's only touching the surface.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Oh, routing profiles and queues are like I think that because they had instances, they finally got instances a couple of months ago. You could have the ability to deploy a few other bits and pieces. Routing profiles and queues is like, I'm going to say maybe 12% of what you're going to actually want to do. Less than that, you reckon less than that? Out of the console that you're, there is a long way to go, but like the Melbourne region, progress. Slow and steady wins the race.
Those limits, semi-hard limits, need to raise a request to actually have those elevated.
Yeah.
And they will grant it to you, but it'll take a week.
Yeah.
But that is on the roadmap to be
Implemented.
To actually
Programmatically do it through what is it, Quota or something.
We're on the roadmap.
Yeah.
Everything is on the roadmap if you look far enough into the future. But yeah, I know it's one of those. It's one of those things. Like the more people that use Connect, the more the demand. Because the more PFRs they get, the higher up the list it's going to get. The faster it goes.
So yeah, and cool stuff is the last slide, isn't it? Is it?
No, that's the cool stuff. That is the cool stuff. We're done.
Yep.
Like that's
That's
work,
it.
All sorted.
All sorted. So
Nice and easy.
that's the end of our What's New for
That was AWS for the month.
this month.
I'm just going to stand here. Cheers.
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason and Matt. So that brings us to our first speaker, which is Matt. For those of you who listen to podcasts and stuff, you probably are familiar with the idea that podcast hosts like to talk about podcasting. This is a similar idea, just talking about what we're doing here. However, Matt is very lazy when it comes to writing bios. His bio, the provided bio was that guy.
Yeah, pretty much.
That guy. So I'll just leave you to actually give a proper. Yep.
I'm back. You missed me? Right. So, presentation for tonight is how I automated what you just saw. Or at least the slide pack of that. If you saw Jason and I, we haven't automated the in-person bit yet. If you saw my presentation from the other month, you know that we're not too far off. Okay, so who am I? Name's Matthew Mariel, Principal Consultant, CMD Solutions, based here in Melbourne. Community builder, AWS community builder, AWS Golden Jacket holder, and officially now back to being an AWS, partner ambassador, I believe the official term is now. So yeah, AWS. If you can't work out from that slide, I spend most of my time dealing with Azure. No, with AWS. And, I spend my free time using AWS to automate my life and my job. So, which, funnily enough, is working with AWS. So, the purpose of tonight's presentation is I wanted to walk through a little bit of not a problem, but a pain in my neck. Every month at this user group, we do the What's New segment, what we just literally walk through, right? And it's not a particularly complicated process, but if you think about it, AWS release thousands of new services and new features every month, which means there are every year. There are hundreds every month. When it gets towards the end of the year with reInvent and all of that, that number goes through the roof. Someone every month needs to look at every release that AWS has made, work out what are the relevant ones, copy the information, and put it into a slide deck. Not a particularly complicated task, but a very time-consuming task. And I don't like time-consuming things. I am a dad now. I do not have time. And even if I did have time, it is very boring. So the other problem is the fact that it is very error-prone. So when we have something that is slow, something that is boring, and something that is error-prone, we like to automate it. So when we're thinking about automating the problem, we can basically break it down. Well, the first thing we need to do is break it down into its individual parts, right? So we need to get all of the announcements from the What's New page on the AWS website. We need to identify any of the new releases that relate to a new service in Melbourne or a new service in Sydney, because we've got those two pages up the front. We then need to prioritize each of the announcements for all the other categories. So, you saw the databases slide there. There were like 12 announcements. There were actually like 21 announcements about different database services and new features, right? There are only so many lines that we can put in the slide. We don't want to put everything up there. We've got to come up with a sort of prioritized list of what we think you might want to hear about, what might be relevant, what could be interesting, those sorts of things, and get rid of a lot of the cruft. Most of you probably don't care what's going on in most of the other regions in the world, apart from maybe one or two of them. So we tend not to tell you when, China's gotten a new service or when Frankfurt's gotten a new service, because it's probably not relevant to the people attending the Melbourne user group. Once we do that, it's pretty simple. For the back end, for the presenters, every month they get a Google Sheets document that basically outlines each of the bullet points on each of the slides and gives them the link to the official announcement page so that they can go through and look at the specific details, get the background. And then, of course, if you've seen those pages, they've got links off to the blog posts that Jeff and the team write so that they can get some background. Useful when I had no idea what Carpenter was, right? So I can go and look at the page and get some information so that I can look intelligible up here, right? Fake it till you make it. We need to populate that sheet and then, have the topic names and the links to the pages. We then obviously need to build the Keynote presentation. For those of you who haven't worked it out, we use Keynote for all of the slide packs for, the intro and the what's new and all those sorts of things. So we've got to populate the Keynote presentation. And then at some point in time in the future, we should probably post links to the Slack channel rather than me having to manually do it every month, because kind of silly to have an automated process that still requires a manual task at the end. That hasn't been implemented yet for a very good reason, and that's that this pipeline still isn't quite perfect, which I will get to in a little bit. But they're kind of the 6 key things that we need our automated solution to do, right? Get the info, rank the info, stick the info in a Google Sheet, stick the info in a Keynote doc, and save them somewhere so that the presenters can get access to it. Easy. So, step 1, get all of the new announcements off the AWS What's New webpage. Well, we can actually make that a little bit easier because AWS are a modern technology company and know that people are going to want to do this, so they actually give us an RSS feed. Right? So that's pretty easy. So we simply have, that's the wrong logo because draw.io hasn't updated their Amazon logos, and I was too lazy to import them myself, so I've used the wrong ones. Don't shoot me, AWS overlords. But we have an event bridge cron trigger that fires off at some time every day. That then calls a Lambda function, which then goes and scrapes the RSS feed for all of the new updates, and it sticks it into the DynamoDB table. Right? Easy. That means every day we get all the new announcements in our DynamoDB table that we can then do stuff with. Right? Pretty simple, nothing overly revolutionary. For those that are curious, all of this is written in Python because I'm not a real programmer. I'm not a real developer. I don't know what I'm doing. I just make this stuff up. Google and Stack Overflow are my friends. But yeah, it's Python. I think from memory that Lambda runs at like 256 meg and, takes no resources and is, relatively quick. And even if, there's been a big lot of announcements for the day, it's still done in sort of 10, 20 seconds. Right. When we scrape the RSS feed, this is what we get back. You get a link to the page that's got the more information. So, we can get that lot of information. That's nice and simple. We get the title. Great. That's what we can stick on the, that's what we can stick in the slide pack. We've got the description, which gives us a nice little overview, which will come in handy later. Publish date, less relevant. Category, kind of useful. We'll come back to that information a little bit later. And the author, which is pretty much always AWS at Amazon.com. So kind of pointless, but we can ignore that for the time being. All right, so that's it. We have our data. All right. All of that is now stuck in our DynamoDB table. We can now do stuff with it. Now, the first thing we need to do is identify whether or not the release has anything to do with an announcement to a new service in Melbourne or a new service in Sydney. If we look at the data, there isn't actually anything that specifically tells us that. Right? It would have been really nice if they had a category. If AWS, if you are listening, it would be really nice if there was a category that says new release or new service or something that, we can, do some conditional logic on. Just a thought. But there isn't actually anything that we can really use to identify that. But as I've highlighted, simple reading of the text, you can work that out pretty quickly. So we're going to want to then work out and identify which workloads are relevant to, or which announcements have to do with Melbourne, which announcements have to do with Sydney, and we're going to want to update our DynamoDB table. Right? So this is pretty simple. So once we write the record to the DynamoDB table, right, we have a Dynamo stream coming off the back of that, which fires a Lambda function, which in turn fires a step function. If you have seen any of my talks in the past, you know that, again, hashtag not a developer, I use a lot of step functions. Right? They are simple, they are easy, and they do a lot of the heavy lifting when it comes to things like error handling and retries and all of that sort of stuff that, is a little bit of a pain. The problem is you can't fire a step function directly from a DynamoDB stream. So you've got to have that little Lambda function in the middle there. Right? The stream fires the Lambda fires the step function. Nice and easy, right? Because we're going to want to do a few things here. And in that step function, we need to stick the logic that's going to work out if it's from Melbourne or if it's from Sydney. Now, we have a bunch of text that we need to read and then infer a bunch of logic off. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that there's a pretty good service at the moment that can do that. I have been really meaning to replace this for months now, but it's one of those things, it works. So I'm just going to kind of keep using ChatGPT because the API is pretty cheap, right? So, we do an API call to ChatGPT and we basically give it the prompt, here's the following block of text talking about a new service coming to AWS's Melbourne region. Answer either yes or no with no further information, right? You then give it the block of text, which is literally the description from the RSS feed, and ChatGPT comes back with a yes or a no. Simple. Make ChatGPT do the work for me, right? We can literally then just take that yes or no and we can stick it back in the DynamoDB table. Easy. Just for reference, it's actually the same Lambda function twice with, and I just call it once with passing a variable of Melbourne and once with a variable of Sydney because, it's the same thing. Right? It's just, I couldn't come up with an easy way to show that on the diagram. So I'm just like, I'll put it in there twice. And this is effectively what we wind up with, right? We got a DynamoDB table. We've got the date, the description, the link, the product, and then we've just got a Melbourne column and a Sydney column. And we can just update that as we go along. Nice, simple, easy, all right? So we now have in our DynamoDB table every record with updated as to whether or not it's to do with the Melbourne or Sydney region. So now when we get to populating our documents down the road, we can just do a search for this date range for, whether or not that's got a yes in it. Yay, that's everything we need. Simple. Next, we need to prioritize the announcements for each category, all right? Because again, as I said before, a particular service or a particular category might have had way too many announcements to go on a slide. So we kind of want to concatenate that a little bit. Unfortunately, again, if we have a look at our DynamoDB table, we have product, but that's not category. We, as a user group, break it up to databases, containers, security, serverless, all of that. We don't break it down service by service because the What's New segment would go for 45 minutes every month, and you don't want to listen to us talk about what's new for 45 minutes. You want to listen to interesting people like me talk about useless stuff like this. So we need to categorize, right? For anybody who was here last month and saw that there were a number of slides with services in really weird places, we had serverless stuff in the databases page and we had, containers in, I think, it was the dev page or something. I was trying to do some SageMaker, categorization, supervised learning type stuff. Needless to say, that's not quite 100% working just yet. So for the moment, we're doing the very simple list of services and category in a table, and we literally just pass in the service and get back which category it belongs to. It works. It will do for the moment. The problem is anything that isn't in that table, say a new service, it then just spits the dummy and gives me, and ends up putting it in the other cool stuff category, which is not the end of the world. Once I fix the whole supervised learning thing, we'll come back and we'll make that better. But for the moment, pretty boring. It's just, key value pair, look it up, get the response back, pass that back into the DynamoDB table, and voila, we have a category, that relates to what slide it's going to appear or what category it's going to appear on based on what product it is. Now, not the world's most interesting way to solve the problem, but hey, it works. Now that we have our category, we then need to work out ranking. Because again, if we've got 20 and we only want to put 7 on a slide, how do we work out which ones we want and which ones we don't want? That's where SageMaker comes in. Right? So this is where we started. This is where I started with SageMaker and thought, now that I've implemented it once, I'm a genius. I know how machine learning works. I've got my certification. I can totally make this work for the categories one. No. Yeah. Doing things once does not expert make. Anywho. We basically just use a simple binary classification. SageMaker, we've gone through. Marked what not we, I'm not going to throw anybody else under the bus. This is all my doing. So if you don't like the types of services that are spoken about in the What's New segment every month, it's because I passed at bad training data. If anybody's got an idea on how I can outsource the training of this data back to you lot so you can let me know which services you're interested in hearing about and which ones you're not, let me know because I'd be super happy to do that. Slackbot or something came to mind, but rabbit hole, we can deal with that later. But for the moment, it goes through, it does basic binary classification based on the description of the announcement, and we get back an importance value for every record in the table. Nice, simple, easy. Now, when it comes to writing the files at the end of the month, we can just do a sort, and we can say grab the top 7 or 10 or whatever the number happens to be, right? And everything else falls to the bottom of the barrel. See, we're getting there. Right, so we've prioritized our announcements by each category. Now we've got to start doing stuff with it. First one is we've got to stick it all in a Google Sheet so that we can prepare the speakers so that they actually look like they know what they're talking about. But this only needs to happen monthly. Everything else we've done until this point has hung off either the original cron trigger or the event stream stemming from the DynamoDB table. This lot of work needs to happen only once a month. So, well, that's pretty easy. New event trigger, new step function. Easy. Unlike DynamoDB streams, you can fire a step function from an event bridge trigger. So, easy. Yay. In there, we stick a step function. We stick a Lambda function called generate Google Sheet, because I'm very good at naming things. Right. It goes to the what's new table, and then it goes out to the Google Sheets API and generates me a file, pulling the key, because I'm not doing Google best practice for authenticating to Google Workspaces or whatever it is it's called nowadays. It's basically just bad old API key thing. Stick that in Secrets Manager, deal with it later. This is not a production system. This totally isn't going to come back and bite me in the butt later. But yeah, it basically just goes, gets the information, makes the call to the table, gets the top 7 for everything, sticks it in the Google Sheets API. Right? Pretty simple. Not overly interesting. If you want the code, I'm more than happy to stick it in the Slack channel, but it's basically a copy paste of Google's example of their API documentation, because again, hashtag not a developer. I just copied their work. That's effectively what we wind up with, right? Google Sheet. What's finally in Melbourne, finally in Sydney databases, list of what each of the updates are and the link to the page, again, pulled from the DynamoDB table. Nice, simple, easy. We now have something that we can prepare the speakers with. Done. Keynote presentation. Populating a keynote presentation. Anybody ever tried to automate the generation of a keynote presentation before? One person. It's not fun, right? In fact, the more I dug down into this, the more I found that automating things on Macs in general is not fun. Just not an enjoyable experience by any stretch of the imagination. But the most simplest thing is, and this should be absolutely no surprise to anybody, Keynote is an Apple thing, therefore means it needs to be done within their walled garden, therefore it needs a Mac, right? Well, that's okay, because we have M1 and M2 metal instances that we can spin up as an EC2 instance, and we can totally then install Keynote on those, and we can build out our presentation. Super simple, right? Easy, right? This is great now that we can do Macs on EC2. However, there are a couple of gotchas when it comes to Macs on EC2. Not the least of which is that they are dedicated hosts, not standard EC2 instances. And more importantly, they come with a 24-hour minimum allocation period. So that whole pay-as-you-go model kind of went out the window. AWS's documentation makes it very clear that that's Apple's fault, not theirs. But either way, in Sydney, a Mac 1, which is the Intel Mac, Mac 2 is the M1 chipset, is $1.35 and change an hour, right? Which works out to be about, $32.50 for a 24-hour period. I am all for being lazy and automating things, but I am not paying $35 a month just to, automate the generation of a keynote presentation. Like, if I was doing this as a business and could batch process 1,000 keynotes and charge everybody $5 for it, yeah, sure, fine, not a problem. I'll pay the $35, right? But $32 US, which is probably like $1 million thanks to the exchange rate at the moment. Too much, right? What's the solution, right? I went for the very low tech. I have a Mac Mini under my desk at home, right? So this feels like a little bit of a cheat, but at the same point in time, yeah, totally a doable thing. But it's not in AWS land. I can't really talk to it via step functions. It's a little bit of a pain in the butt. All right, cool. So now we've got to start doing things. SSM. SSM is fantastic. I'll just load SSM, make it as a playbook, totally solves my problem. Poopsies, SSM doesn't actually work on Mac OS if it's on-prem. It only works on Mac OS instances if they're on EC2. Bummer. So that didn't work. So we went with option 2, the good old SQS queue, not topic. That's a typo. That's bad. I should totally go and fix that. Right, so stick a request in an SQS topic, SQS queue with the payload. Yeah, then have a Python file, Python file on the Mac Mini that periodically polls the SQS queue, looks for the payload, then uses ActionScript. Yeah, don't. Just don't. I've done a little bit of a hack here. So I've done the good old make a template of the file and then do the curly bracket variable name, curly bracket. So my ActionScript basically then just needs to do a find and replace for everything. It works kind of most of the time. It's fine, sort of. And then once the Python file finishes doing its thing, if it doesn't crash, it passes a send task success back to the step function that put the message in the queue in the first place, so that the step function knows that the keynote file has been generated and can continue on its merry way. This is one of the reasons why I like step functions, because that whole, wait for the asynchronous task to complete thing just becomes user call within step functions and make it AWS's problem, because that's what I kind of pay them for. That's what we effectively wind up with, right? So you've got the cron trigger that fires the generate the Google Sheet. Once that's done, it goes and puts the payload into the SQS queue. We've got the little script on the on-prem Mac Mini that periodically polls the SQS queue. It then goes and does its thing and then sends a status update to the wait for token success. And then the step function goes and, goes, yay, I am done. And voila, we now have 3 slides missing. 3 slides. Let me just go back for a minute and I can work off the rest. There we have a keynote presentation all nicely done. We now have our keynote presentation. We have our Google Sheet. We're ready to go. Now all we need to do is notify the team that it is done. And here are the links, and you guys can now go and read your Google Sheet, and Ian can put the pack in his slide pack so that he can present it, and everybody's all good. Everybody's happy. Yay. Now, we use Slack for our internal communication, same Slack that we told everybody that they should join. Nice, simple, easy. AWS, chatbot, easy, right? We can totally just integrate straight into that, and we can, nice, simple. Haven't gotten around to that yet, and there is a really good reason for that. If we go back a little bit and all the way back, remember that RSS record that I spoke about back at the beginning? You know how I said that we put and I apologize, I'm flipping through these because the last couple of slides appear to be missing. iCloud, you fail me again. Starting today, users can experience a simplified visual layout, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, that doesn't fit on a slide. So the reason this is not finished and the reason I still manually let people know once these packs are completed is those titles and the descriptions need to be truncated and simplified so that they can actually go on the slide pack. Because looking here, announcing enhanced user interfaces for AWS supply chain demand planning. You guys probably just want to know AWS supply chain demand planning. Now, again, this is one of those, some basic NLP and some inference here should be a relatively simple, fix this, make it go away. It's just been on the, man, when you're a dad, you just don't have like any time ever again. Been meaning to come back and do this for a while now. Like, if somebody is willing to fix this problem for me, I am totally happy to give you access to the source code and I can make it your problem. But it's kind of the one thing that is standing in the way of like, having this whole thing just work. Because yeah, that's the manual task. So at the moment we're getting the Keynote file, but it's full of needs improvement bullet points. And needs a little bit of cleanup. So at the moment, it generates the Keynote. I then go in there. I then tweak the words and all of that, stick in anything extra that I think people might be interested in, like the Outpost thing. That didn't rank because Outposts doesn't rank for our stuff. Because is anybody using Outpost? Yeah, that's why we don't bother giving much in the way of Outpost updates because, yeah. When you're building the cloud, people very rarely want it. On-prem, and even if you did, they're horrendously expensive. I go in, add anything that might be of interest, and then I save it, upload it to Google Drive, and then put the Slack message in myself, and it's all good. If we can fix that last little bit, then the whole thing becomes an end-to-end automated joy, and then all we've got to do is come up with a way to stop AWS doing new announcements the night before user group, because this tends to run on a Monday night, and then inevitably on Tuesday or Wednesday morning, AWS makes a whole bunch of announcements to new things in Melbourne or some really interesting things that we want to introduce, and we've got to go back and update the pack. So if we can come up with a way to stop AWS from doing that, that would be really helpful. Otherwise, does anybody have any questions? Yes.
So on the Mac, would you just have a Python script just like folding it?
Yeah, literally. It's a spare Mac I've got under the desk. It was one of those impulse purchases a while ago, because that's what you do. You just impulse buy Apple stuff. No, it was for a project that didn't end up happening, and it's kind of just sat there. But it's I need the machine in a pinch. So yeah, it's literally just got a Python script that just sits there polling in the background 24 hours a day. It's actually got like 30 of them because it does a whole bunch of other stuff in my home automation and a few other things, but that's not important. No, at the moment it sticks it in my iCloud so that I can then update it and get it back to the rest of the team. Yes?
When you were talking about making the content sort of get to the point,
Yes. Yes. Yes, you probably could. It would probably be a very simple thing. I've just got to spend the time to make sure that if I pass it a month's worth of updates, are they all like, how good does it work kind of thing. But again, it's one of those, it just needs somebody to sit there and do it for an hour or two and validate the response. But yeah, we could totally use ChatGPT to fix that. Michael.
How do you think the cost of ChatGPT compares to Comprehend in working out Melbourne versus Sydney?
So my ChatGPT bill tends to be somewhere in the order of cents. But I have a sneaking suspicion that if I could get Comprehend to do it, it would be in the order of zero. Because like that was the thing that I didn't have time to put in this pack. This whole, with the exception of training SageMaker, and I don't know if that's because I didn't push it hard enough or whether or not I'd already used my free tier allocation. This thing is free. Like the Lambdas don't cost anything. The SQS, like we're pushing one SQS message a month. The DynamoDB table is megs in size. Cron jobs don't really start, like I think they round back to zero until you get to tens of thousands a month. Like this thing literally costs nothing to run. ChatGPT is like the expense. So yeah, I think if we could get it to zero, it would be in the same ballpark as far as price is concerned. Any other questions, queries, concern? Yes. It does have an on-prem agent. It absolutely does have an on-prem agent. And it talks a lot about how that SSM on-prem agent will work with Mac until you get in the detail. And then there is a little warning box at the bottom of the documentation that says, will not work on Mac OS on on-prem or hybrid environment configurations. Yeah, that was kind of annoying. Yes.
Keynote is giving you so much pain. Why not use Google Slides?
That's a really good question, and because that was totally going to be my solution for the outset. Why use Keynote instead of Google Slides? Because we can't always guarantee that we're going to have good internet as presenters, because at NAB we can totally get it, but if we need to go somewhere else, or if we're on somebody else's laptop, we can't always guarantee that they're going to have the right login, they're going to have a stable internet and all of that. Keynote is just a way for us to have a file on the local machine that we can just open and we know it's going to work. And if you have heard from any of the organisers about issues that we can run into when running a user group session, people being sick, people being unavailable, speakers unfortunately having to pull out at the last minute, people forgetting to order dinner. The fewer things that we can have go wrong or potentially go wrong, the better. Would it have been easier if we used something else like OpenOffice or LibreOffice or even Microsoft PowerPoint? Yes, I can actually tell you I've automated PowerPoint in the past. Yes, totally. The other thing that we could totally do if we wanted to make our lives easy is go for one of those web, what is it? Is it Resolve or Reveal.js or one of those, web-based, slide packs. That, again, because they're built for automation, they would also make life easy. But it's just I don't want to have to make everybody else change what they do just to fit my laziness. It's like if I'm the one that wants to be lazy, then I'm going to have to put the blood, sweat and tears in to make it work.
That same point, you could use that as an intermediary to then save as.
Yes, you could absolutely use that as an intermediary to then save as. And that is one of those things, if anybody heard my presentation last week at the serverless meetup around spending 30 minutes with a napkin and a pen to map something out before you start building it. Yeah. Don't start solving a problem by opening a code editor. That's a really bad idea. Because it's those things that are like hindsight is 2020. But yes, hope that was enjoyable.
Thank you, Matt. Also, to clarify things, I used to be the person building these slides. I solved all of Matt's problems by handing it off. To me. So there's your solution. Find another Matt. And with that, we've come to our second speaker of the night. So Michael Walmsley. Michael is a lead technology architect in the MyWizard automation group at Accenture, where he's focused on building event-driven products in the cloud. He has been disrupting enterprise thinking since 2019, focusing on AWS serverless and event-driven architectures. And he was recently announced as an AWS serverless hero. Congratulations on that again. Thank you. And the slides should be showing up. Yep.
Cool. Awesome. Hey, how's everyone going? My name's, as I was introduced, Michael Walmsley, serverless hero. I work for Accenture, and I'm also working on building serverlessdna.com, which is my own blog site and knowledge portal around serverless technologies. So I'm going to talk to you about building a Python serverless URL shortener for all your domains. So I'm doing a lot of work in the community. It's part of why became a serverless hero. I do a lot of community work and do a lot of blogging. So I decided that I wanted to not have a nasty long, blogs obviously have names and you want SEO. So you want those things to work for you. But sharing those things, I wanted a short URL to share that. So I actually built my own. And I want to share that project with you. It's open source now. So I'm going to walk through some of the things I did, some of the ways I built it. And we're going to focus more on what I did to build it and talk about all the things that I did. And I'll walk you through at the end how you can actually take that and use that to build your own URL shortener for your own domain. Actually, if I've got time and the demo gods are with us, I'm actually going to deploy this thing live, and we'll talk about some of the cool things that I learned and some of the hassles that I had along the way. Because it's It's not always simple building serverless. Who builds serverless here today? Just a few. Who likes Python? I think Python, like Matt, I'm a Python developer, but I'm actually a developer, a professional developer, and I use Python. And I'm proud to use Python. So let's get started. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about what does the URL shortener do. We're going to talk about what I did to build it. So we'll talk about the architecture, talk about the things I used to build it, and my better method of building with SAM and CLI and Python. And then we'll look at how you can build that for your domains so you can actually go off and build it. And we'll talk about some of the things that I found along the way that were troublesome, and some of the things that you can use to get around them, and some of the things I learned. So let's kick in. What is a URL? Oops, I've just done what Matt did and pressed too many buttons. What does the URL shortener do to it? It's the hello world of the cloud, I've decided, URL shorteners. Does anyone know what URL shorteners do? Pretty obvious. We have a short URL. I use my own domain of Wamsles because that's what I use on Twitter. It's my handle on Twitter. So I decided to have a Spanish domain. So you can go to Wamsles/PowerTools and it'll go off that really long URL. The way it works is I built a little serverless system, which is the URL shortener across on the right-hand side. Short URL goes, and it either sends back a 301 permanent redirect, or it sends back, if it doesn't find it, it's going to send a 302 temporary redirect to a default URL. So we can have some sort of nice place to go, so that no matter what people type in when they try and hit my URL shortener, it's going to go somewhere sensible and not go somewhere crazy or just give you a 404 not found or web page not found. So we're sort of going for utility and making sure it always works. So what did I build? I built this. There's 1,000 with serverless on AWS. There's a lot of different ways to build things. I decided to keep it really simple because I like to do things in the simple way. So I built a really simple. I think this is about as simple an architecture you can get on serverless. You have lots of boxes always, but I used Route 53, API Gateway, Lambda. Certificate manager up the top there because we want to have our own domain, so it has to be custom. And we have an AWS Lambda that goes off and talks to a DynamoDB. So it's really quite straightforward to get going. And obviously with CloudWatch for doing all our logging and working out what's going wrong and where things are going wrong. That's what I did when I built it. How did I build it? I went off and built that I like building serverless. I like to use SAM CLI. People who do build with serverless, do people know about SAM CLI? There's people know about serverless framework. There's CDK, there's all sorts of things. There's thousands of things out there these days. I like SAM CLI because it's pretty easy, it's pretty simple. And I like Python. Python's really good. SAM CLI and Python together have a few rough edges. We'll talk about that. And we'll talk about an open source project that I've got that actually improves some of those rough edges. And I also like to use PowerTools for Lambda. So anyone who knows me knows that I talk a lot about serverless and I talk a lot about PowerTools for Lambda. It's a great open source project. I've been working on that project part-time for about 3 years. It makes best practice for serverless really simple. That's what it's built for. So I like to sort of say, well, if you're going to start building in Python and with Python and serverless, going off and using the AWS PowerTools for Lambda is a really good way of getting started and getting best practice. It's for Python. There's versions of it also for TypeScript, for Java, and out there now for .NET. So it's got good coverage. Exciting announcement for PowerTools. They just got announced as a separate AWS team. So the people behind PowerTools are now a funded AWS service team. So we can probably expect to see a lot more love in the PowerTools range. And interestingly, they renamed themselves to AWS PowerTools specifically for Lambda, which opens the door for other services having PowerTools available. So I expect that the whole premise of PowerTools is all about developer experience. So we can look forward to some developer experience improvements coming forward in the development cycles for serverless, which is kind of exciting. So what's so hard about SAM CLI and Python? What don't I like about it, especially with Python? One of the things that SAM CLI does when you build a Python function is it's going to go off and look at your folder. So it's going to look at your hello world folder over here. I'm not going to move away from the microphone. It's going to grab that. It's going to mount that directory into a container to go off and do the build. Now, you sort of go, well, why do I need a container to do that build? Well, with Python, sometimes with dependencies, there's binary dependencies that come in with serverless. And when you develop on a Mac and you zip up your project and you push it up to the cloud, it's on Amazon Linux. And when you have a Mac dependency, it's just going to fail, and you're going to get import module didn't work, and you're going to go, why does my code not work? And can be quite confusing. So the way SAM gets around this is they build within containers. And so that allows you to have all of your code and your requirements packaged up in the one place. So why is that a rough edge? It's because that file requirements.txt. One of the things that SAM requires, and I'm just going to jump out into my code, I'm going to Alt tab across into my terminal and set this up so you can actually see what's going on. Here's one I prepared earlier. One of the things that SAM does is it's going to create all these folders, and I've created these services folders. This is my project. SAM CLI itself is just going to give you a hello world, and you have to have requirements text in there. What I've done instead is I've gone out and built a custom project. I've built a custom SAM template for Python. This is based on the hello world that SAM produces, so it's exactly the hello world with some quality of life improvements for development. Primarily, I've created a services folder. That services folder is where you can put all your lambdas, and it makes a lot of sense. And once we do that, we can have some automation that I've built, which enables the requirements.txt for each of the services to be generated. One of the problems with SAM CLI and requirements.txt is the fact that you can have a lot of dependencies for one Lambda, and another Lambda can have a very few dependencies. And a lot of people just copy that requirements.txt everywhere and just reuse it and have one big package for everything, which is always bad news when you're building a Lambda. So the concept here is I actually use, in the Michael Walmsley beta method with SAM CLI, I utilize poetry with Python. With packaging, you can use pip or you can use Python. I like to use poetry. It's kind of like you use yarn or npm for Java and NodeScript. So I use poetry, and I use poetry with a single difference. One of the things that I do is enable. If I just make this bigger so people can see it, actually make this so that our dependencies now have groups. So we can have groups here for our dev dependencies. And we scroll down, you can actually add more groups. And those groups are named to match the services. So there's a little bit of magic in a make script. It's just going to go off and generate all of the, if I go back to my code, there's a little bit of magic that goes off and creates the requirements.txt file based off of what's in my poetry dependencies. So I can add my dev dependencies, I can add my poetry dependencies, and it's going to add a combination of common dependencies and specific dependencies for my functions, and keeps your requirements text files really, really small. And that's a real problem when you're dealing with SAM CLI. My other things I do with this project is I've got a make file in there that sort of gives you a whole lot of automation. So there's a whole lot of automation, PyLinting, all that sort of stuff built in. So it's kind of like a representation of best practice for getting started with Python and SAM CLI. That's what I use to get started. And that's why one of the hardest things with SAM CLI and Python, one of the difficult things is just getting all your requirements worked out. So that's what we do. We enable, what we do here is using poetry, we got centralized dependency management. So with that, when I load up in the IDE, anytime that I type in code, I've got type hinting happening centrally across all the Lambda code inside this mono repo that's deploying multiple Lambdas. There's some make file magic to hide away CLI switches. And I've got the common thing of make deploy in my make file that goes off and runs a build first. Because with SAM CLI, if you make a code change, if you don't actually do a SAM build, when you try and deploy it, you just get an error message and it just goes, you know what? There's no changes, so there's nothing to do. And that's quite annoying. So I decided to do a make deploy, which actually automates some of that stuff because I always forget. And you always forget the worst possible moment. And the other magic is the make dependency script, which goes off and just automates and looks at all the folders to generate your requirements.txt file. And it sort of makes life really, really simple and really, really fast. So let's take a look at the project, but we already did. I should follow my slides in more detail. Cool. So taking a look at the project, let's just take another quick look at the project. So services has my shortener URL. It has my app.py, which is representing the actual URL shortener. URL shortener code is very simple. I like to use, like I said, I like Power Tools, Lambda Power Tools. So Lambda Power Tools makes building APIs really quite straightforward. You can actually build it in very much like, if people are familiar with Python, familiar with Flask or Django for APIs or Fast API, Power Tools utilizes the same kind of paradigm as Fast API. So it creates your your gateway resolver. Now the magic of the gateway resolver, it's going to work. This is working for HTTP, but I can actually change this code around and use it to a normal REST API or a function URL, or I can even run it off of an ALB utilizing Power Tools, because it adapts resolvers to each of those core triggers for Lambda, which is kind of cool. It goes off, and once I create the application, I can actually add a route, a variable route with slug to represent my short URL. And that it will execute the code inside my function, which goes off and looks up in DynamoDB and returns the URL or not, and determines whether you're going to get a temporary or a permanent redirect for the URL shortener. And the actual Lambda handler itself just does a little bit of Power Tools magic of tracing and injecting the Lambda context. That's going to give you X-ray across all your functions. And the last bit is just this is standard calling convention. I've made this a little bit done a lot of error checking here to make sure this works in production really, really nicely. And then I'm catching all the exceptions. And if I catch an exception, I'm just going to do a temporary redirect to the standard domain that's already been set up. So it kind of keeps that nice and simple. It means the service is always going to work no matter what happens, which is a good thing to do in production. So here we are with our API. We've got our make files. We've got everything ready to deploy. How can you go off and build this for your own URL shorteners? Now, part of what I've done with this project is I've done this for my WAMSL's domain, but also I'm building serverless DNA. So I've also got the same project deployed for slsdna.com. So there's a few things that I've done inside the project to make sure that it can be deployed to multiple domains. And that's where all your domains comes about. And you can actually take this away and deploy this on all of your domains. So how can we build it? So this is the architecture. This is all represented inside the SAM CLI file. There's 99 just like AWS, 99.999995% of this project is automated in SAM CLI in the SAM CLI file. The other 0.0005% is ClickOps, and there's a small little bit of ClickOps that we need to do to make this work, and it's all about certificates, because certificates are hard. I've never managed to automate certificates. If anyone knows how to do that, let me know, because I think that's really hard. I did manage to automate the Route 53 part, which was a little bit of fun and a little bit of learnings along the way. So let's build one. Let's actually go and build it. I've actually got the code down. We can actually go and build this right now. We're going to walk through the process of how you can actually take this project and deploy that in your own AWS account. So the first thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to set up a certificate in our certificate manager. So if you log on to I've logged onto my account, and inside certificate manager, I'm going to work on my dev domain. So I'm going to use my star.dev.slsdna.com. I'm going to use a star, a wildcard domain here, because wildcard domains are fun. And there's some really fun things you can do with HTTP REST APIs and API gateways with wildcard domains. And there's a few little rough edges around that as well. So we're going to need a certificate manager. And the other thing we're going to need is we're going to need this hosted zone ID for Route 53 before we can go off and build this. Let's not go to things along the way. So let's go and build that. So I'm going to go back into my terminal. I'm going to make my terminal nice and large so everyone can see what I'm not too large, so no one can see the screen. But what I need to be able to do here is what I can do is I can actually, I can do a SAM deploy. And we just need to do, once you put it down, you just need to deploy guided. We need to deploy guided. What SAM's going to do is going to look inside the template that I produced. It's going to look for all the parameters. Because I've automated the reuse of the project by using a lot of CloudFormation parameters. There's a lot of different ways you can do that. That's the way I've chosen for this particular project. So I'm going to call this one userml wildcard. I'm going to deploy that to AP Southeast 2. And now it's going to ask me, now I've got a number of parameters inside my template file. So if we jump into the template file just quickly and open up over here, at the very, very top, I've defined a whole heap of parameters that allow for the automation. So that allows me to actually use parameters to have different configuration profiles to deploy the same project for different use cases. And that's what we're walking through at the moment. So it's asking for the certificate ARN. So I need to jump in quickly into my dev domain and grab the ARN. And we can just paste that guy straight in. Except now it's that's Code Whisperer trying to go off and do some authentication. Sorry, people. The other thing it's going to ask is for the domain name. Now, the domain name I'm going to use for this one is I'm actually going to use an asterisk because there's a fun thing. I didn't actually realize when I was building this that you could actually utilize a wildcard domain on an API gateway. Does anyone know that? Does anyone know you can use wildcards on API domains for gateways and it works? I didn't know that. I was excited. I got really excited. So I'm going to do start.dev.slsDNA. So people did know that? I saw a couple of nodding heads. Yeah? New for me. Hosted zone ID. Now, this is the fun one, hosted zone ID. Let's jump in here because one of the things I learned when dealing with Route 53 for automating DNS, and that's what this is about, just making sure your DNS is completely automated. So when we build the gateway, it's going to automatically register the domain name for us. So it just all works magically straight up. One of the things that I found out about utilizing the HTTP domains, you've got two choices. You can use the zone ID or you can use the zone name. Now, I use the zone name. It took me ages to work out what was going wrong because when you click into dev.slsdna.com, when you open up the hosted zone details, you've got two options with HTTP references for domains. You can either use zone ID or zone name. The zone name listed in the console here is dev.slsdna.com. So you go, that's the name I need to use to make this work. No, it's not. I couldn't work out, it took me ages to work out why, and it wasn't until I started writing a blog post about this, I switched it to use the zone ID. So we're going to grab the zone ID today. That's what we're going to use today. But it wasn't until I dug into, well, why couldn't I use the zone name? Why didn't that work? And anyone who knows about DNS, domain names need to end in a dot. Yeah? When you're using CloudFormation to register your domain with Route 53, you need to use a dot at the end of the zone name. Even on the console, it's listed as the zone name. It confused me totally. There was a little caveat in the documentation hidden away. So that's what I came up about. Hosted zone ID goes in. Then we would need a redirect URL. So for this one, I'm actually going to use, I'm just going to use my serverlessdna.com. So we just put a complete domain. And then it's got some logging for error. Now it's going to ask some standard questions. It's going to ask, when you do guided, it asks you a whole lot of questions to the wizard. It's going to confirm changes. Yeah, let's confirm that. I like confirming changes because then you can see what's going on, right? It's a nice change set. IAM role creation, yes, default for that. Disable rollback, that's fine. Now, they'll get a warning about URL short function has no authentication. One thing SAM CLI does is a little bit responsible, which is good. So it catches you when you don't know what you're doing and you go, whoa, there's no authentication. This is a URL shortener. We don't want authentication. It's acting like a website, right? So we don't need any authentication. So we have to override that with a yes. And it's going to ask you again and go, are you sure? So we'll go yes. And then we're going to save that. We can save that. And we'll save that to our samconfig.toml, which is the standard file. And we can give it a name. So I'm going to just userml-wild, which gives us a saved configuration. It's going to look for those resources. Unable to find credentials. I knew it. I'm just going to log on. I'm using Leap. Does anyone know about Leap for managing credentials for AWS? This is a really good open source project. Currently, it's open source. Leap enables you. This works with SSO. It also works with enterprise grade SSO. So I use this for my own personal control tower setup where I've got lots of accounts. It enables me to actually have multiple accounts active, so I can activate my development account. So it's on the command line. Why isn't that changing? Open source is letting me down. It has there's a little bit of a the menu, drop down menu, and the main screen when they're showing are kind of out of sync sometimes. But this is really good. I use this at Accenture to get access to SSO secured instances of Azure and AWS that are enterprise secured. And it does it automatically for you. Once you put the correct creds in, it'll pop up your little browser window in the app and allow you to finish your authentication using your tokens. We use passwordless where I work. So using the Microsoft Authenticator works really well. I love it. Also allows you to have multiple profiles. So I've got the development profile active. So that will enable me to do /guided/ Now I've just got to add the profile, which I forgot to do before. And because we've already done, I'm not going to go through that again. What I can actually do is, rather than do guided again, is do my config env. And we call that userml -wild. We can go off into our dev deployment. And if I didn't do this, I've gone completely off script now. So when you're doing a talk and go completely off script, this is what's going to happen. Things are not going to work right, and you're going to start typing stuff in, and people are going to go, "What the heck is he doing? What is going on? I thought this was pretty easy." And this is what happens when you go off script. So don't do that. It's not a good idea. It's going to go off and deploy, and it's not going to go off and deploy. This is not working for me today. The demo gods are against me. I knew that was going to happen. Let's just call our stack name that. Let's go into AP Southeast one. These two. Oh gosh. Let's just abort on the let's abort the demo right there. This is where we have to go. Let's just not persevere because we can't continue persevering. It does work. It does deploy. It really is easy. I've done it. I did this last week in a talk last week online, and it worked really, really easily. I think Ian was right when he said this is the cursed AWS meetup. I think he was right. Let's talk about some of the things I've learned along the way. Number one thing, beware of the demo gods. Be prepared to abort your demo when it's going off script way too much. Things I learned, like don't name your cloud. If you're going to reuse a stack, don't name your cloud resources. Let CloudFormation or whatever ISU tool you're using, let it decide what to call things, because it will then automate and do some randomization. It's going to keep things really, really simple. Consider external dependencies. So consider your external dependencies and really map those out. Get a napkin and write those things down. What are the things external that I need to worry about? And what are the things that I want to change if I deploy this multiple times? Because you can use CloudFormation parameters like I did. You can use SSM parameter store. I think they're pretty good choices. There are lots of other choices, and you're welcome to choose those choices if you go. One other thing I learned with HTTP API gateways, the certificate in the net domain has to exactly match your custom domain. So I used a wildcard certificate, but to do that, I had to actually deploy a wildcard domain for those two things to match. That's really annoying. I didn't know that, because if you do a normal gateway, you can probably just use it. Everyone's used to using wildcard domains, and they just deploy those things. Maybe I'm old school. I'm thinking of HTTP only in Apache. Maybe I'm just too old school. But anyway, they have to exactly match. Consider delete protection for your data resources. I think that's really important for CloudFormation and data resources. I didn't do that. And when I was deleting some stuff in my production account, I deleted my live stack by mistake. I didn't have delete protection. I went, delete protection is a really good idea. Nothing dangerous, didn't lose much data. It was all cool. And the other thing is Route 53 configuration via CloudFormation resources. Hosted name is not what it says on the console screen. Read the CloudFormation docs is probably a really good intention. Now I had a demo, I did intend to actually demo the thing working, but obviously that didn't work, but it does work. So as an example, it does work because things and links and references, I've got my SAM beta template. You'll see there it's Wamsl's SAM-template. My URL shortener project is called short URL because it's short, nice and short. I use AWS Power Tools for Lambda a lot. I highly recommend if you're going to get started with Lambda, look at the project. No matter what language you use, it really will automate a lot of the stuff you do. It gets rid of boilerplate. It's built around developer experience and accelerating teams. And I honestly feel that it delivers on that really reliably. And of course, you can just look at my GitHub as well. I've got lots of different stuff out there on SAM CLI, CDK. So here we go. Scan thing, provide me feedback. I love feedback. Questions? So the question is, what was the credentials tool that I use? It's called Leap. So leap.cloud. I'll just show this again so everyone can actually see it on the screen. Let's just go about. It's called Leap by New Valari, which I believe, if I just do a random search, it's at leap.cloud. So leapp.cloud, which is really good. It deals with not just AWS, but also we'll do Azure. And it's quite a powerful tool. It also has. They've also got a paid team version coming out, so to enable enterprises to cross teams. So that's quite interesting. I really like it. I think it's really powerful. It makes these CLI really simple. You don't have to jump through a lot of hoops because this was out before I think the AWS CLI started supporting SSO really well. Way before that, and that was always a pain. Any other questions? Awesome. Don't forget the scan the QR code. Give me feedback, or you can go to Wamsl's/AWS user group feedback and provide me with honest feedback because I love it. Thank you very much. Long enough to be scanned.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Michael. To clarify Michael's comment about the cost meetup thing earlier, all the things that Matt mentioned earlier about that could go wrong at a meetup, they all happened tonight. So that said, I hope everybody had a great evening. We had 2 fantastic talks. And we're not completely done yet. We still have our marketplace segment. If anybody is hiring, please raise a hand. Yep. Just give like a 30-second spiel. Yep. Awesome. You can find around. Nobody else? That is make this a very quick session. So I want to once again thank our sponsors, CMD Solutions, Versant and CIFO, and of course NAP for the venue. And with that, I want to thank you all for coming. We still have some food left. Please take it, otherwise we'll have to throw it away. That's a waste of food. It works perfectly fine for lunch tomorrow, or for dinner tomorrow. Take some home. Give it to your partner at home as, hey, I'm sorry I wasn't here tonight. I've done that. And yeah, I hope to see you all again next month. Same place, same last Wednesday of the month. Thank you all for coming. Bye.